Faizullah lived in a tiny, remote village in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. He was 24, unmarried, and served his neighbours well as a hard-working and skillful potter. As he walked the hot, dusty streets and alleys, he would smile contentedly, greeting everyone he met and stopping frequently to talk with friends, relations and customers while he delivered his wares and took new orders. Bowls, plates, jugs, cooking vessels, vases. He was rarely short of work and loved nothing better than to be sitting at his wheel for hours on end, turning lumps of dull red clay into beautiful and very practical artifacts. He knew little about the world beyond his village. Life for Faizullah and his neighbours was far from easy. Living conditions were primitive, and although the year was 1987, the villagers were poorly provided for in terms of transport, electricity, schools, medical services or means of communication. Their location could not even be reached by road, only winding precipitous mule tracks, and supplies from beyond the village were infrequent and unreliable. Yet the people lived a simple, uncomplaining lifestyle, devout in their adherence to the teachings of Islam. They lived variously in tents, simple stone-built houses, or, as in Faizullah's case, one of the many caves that broke up the hard, barren maze of rocky outcrops and steep mountain passes. Families lived off the meagre crops they grew, the herbs they foraged, the bread they made, the sheep, goats and chickens they raised. They knew there was a war on. They had heard many tales of the holy Mujahideen rebels fighting the godless Russian invaders, and sometimes heard distant gunfire and explosions as soldiers and aircraft tried to flush the rebels from their mountain strongholds. Then one day, the fighting came too close. Without warning, jets roared overhead, firing rockets and dropping bombs, terrifying families and scattering livestock. Whoever the intended target was, the village was now caught in the crossfire. Dust, smoke, shouting and screaming filled the air. Faizullah, working outside at his potter's wheel, realised the danger he was in. Covering his ears to block out the awful noise and squinting up at the sky crisscrossed with vapour trails, he ran desperately for the shelter of his cave. Once inside, sweating, panting, coughing and peering out through the acrid smoke, Faizullah told himself he should be out there helping his neighbours, freeing people trapped under rubble, carrying the injured to safety. But no sooner had he decided to risk his life and dash back outside than a massive explosion rocked the landscape like a mighty earthquake. He crouched at the floor as the chamber filled with dust, shielded his ears again as the mountainside groaned hideously above his head, and cried out in shock and dismay as a dislodged 100-ton boulder came crashing to a halt in the very entrance of his dwelling, blocking out light, air, the pandemonium of the air raid, and all hope of rescue. Faizullah lay motionless. He could hear nothing but the ringing in his ears caused by the terrible explosion. He could see nothing but blackness all around him. He could feel a draught, a gentle breeze against his cheek, and took comfort from the fact that air still circulated through the numerous fissures and shafts that riddled the mountain and ventilated his cave. As the ringing eased, he could hear running water and knew then that he still had the clear rivulets that ran through cracks, down walls and along channels into the depths below. As his eyes grew accustomed to the dark, he also noticed a small glimmer of light that he told himself must signify a gap of some sort between the boulder and the cave entrance. He shuffled over to investigate, but soon found it offered no way out of his prison. The eye-level gap was about the shape and size of a man's arm, and though it obviously connected with the outside world, it twisted and turned, precluding any possibility of visual contact. The fighting tailed off, the smoke began to clear, and villagers scurried around searching for victims and assessing the damage. It was remarked that no one had seen the potter, So a small delegation made its way up the stony path to his place of work and the cave he occupied. The villagers paused as they reached Faizula's wheel, crowned with a half-finished pot. Shaping tools, a wooden stool and bags of clay lay scattered on the ground. As the anxious neighbours looked to the cave, the awful truth struck them. There was no cave to see, just a 10-metre high slab of faceless mountain. The alarm was raised, and soon people were scrambling over the rock like ants, calling Faizula's name, looking for openings, dreaming up impossible strategies to dig through the mountain or roll away the stone. It was a young boy who found the crevice, shouted into it, and recoiled in shock as he heard a muffled reply. Suddenly there was joy and excitement. Everyone wanted to shout through the gap and reassure the occupant within, opening a conversation with Faizula that would continue for many years. For there was no giant crane, no powerful rock drill, no tool or engine of any sort that could make much impression on this firmly wedged monolith, nor any way of acquiring such equipment if it even existed within 500 miles. The villagers could talk to their friend, comfort and pray with him. Someone cleverly worked out that they could force a length of plastic drain pipe through the crevice, by which means they were able to pass him small packets of food, letters, writing materials, candles, firewood and other needs. He had light, shelter, a bed, warm clothing, food and water, and plenty of time to read, write and reflect. So Faizula accepted his fate and settled on the life of a hermit, albeit one with many friends and well-wishers. Gradually word of his situation reached other villages and towns, in the mountains and further afield, Kabul, Islamabad, Tehran, and cities and countries Faizula had never heard of. As the internet grew, so did the legend of the man in the cave, along with many embellishments, religious interpretations, suggestions of sainthood and stories of healing. People would come on pilgrimage, enduring great hardship just to see the cave, touch the boulder, and shout messages to the holy hermit. Reporters and film crews came, and the story spread further. It seemed the whole world knew, or thought they knew, Faizula. Then one day, some 18 years from the day of his incarceration, Faizula's life changed again. Peace had not returned. The mountains still rumbled with bombs and rockets, now different invaders pursuing different rebels. But this time it was nature, not man, that rocked the mountains. A short series of earth tremors shook the village to its core, sent people running from their homes, scattered the sheep, goats and mules, and gently rolled the boulder 2 meters back from the entrance of the cave. Faizula picked himself up off the floor, paused briefly to take in what had happened, and walked free, blinking and shading his eyes, but otherwise upright, calm, and concerned only for his neighbours. The legend was over, but nobody cared about that, least of all the ecstatic villagers as they wept with joy, kissed and hugged their long-lost brother, and carried him shoulder high through the village to cheers and cries of jubilation. As news of his release spread, Faizula received invitations to appear on TV, meet famous people, sell his story to newspapers and magazines. But he turned them all down, refusing to see himself as special, let alone holy. He wanted now what he had always wanted, to be a good potter, a valued member of his community, a villager, just like his friends and neighbours. So that's what he set out to become. And once again, the dust settled, and life in the mountain village returned to normal.